Exatamente. Mhm. Okay. Well, let's start. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. Bom dia, boa tarde ou boa noite a todos e todas. Bem-vindos à oitava sessão do Cycle of Meetings, Gender Studies and Classical Scholarship, que é organizado pelo EuGeStA, como parte do projeto em estudos de gênero e estudos clássicos. EuGeStA é uma rede europeia de estudos de gênero na antiguidade, que foi fundada pela professora Jacqueline Fabre-Serris, latinista da Universidade de Lille, em 2009. Essa rede, ela reúne pesquisadores de várias áreas de estudos da antiguidade, incluindo estudos de língua, literatura, arqueologia, economia, direito, medicina, filosofia, história, história da arte, religião e estudos de recepção. E todos compartilham o interesse comum em estudos de gênero. Em 2011, foi fundado uma revista acadêmica com o mesmo nome e como editoras a professora Jacqueline Fabre-Serris e Judith Hallett, de Maryland. Mais informações sobre o projeto podem ser encontrados no website do grupo. Numa nova fase desta rede, foi criado o ciclo de encontros, que foi organizado, né, e agora já está no seu segundo ano, terminando o segundo ano com esta sessão. O objetivo do projeto é disseminar publicações importantes na área de estudos de gênero, né, a cada 2 meses, durante os semestres letivos. Depois de algumas sessões, né, que todas estão gravadas no canal do YouTube do EuGeStA, nós estamos, né, vamos apresentar dois novos livros e com duas autoras convidadas, uma editora e a outra organizadora. As sessões, elas seguem uma determinada estrutura, tem uma apresentação, depois 15 minutos para cada palestrante e depois mais 10 minutos para cada respondente. E um tempo de 25 minutos para uma discussão geral entre todos que estão presentes. Essa sessão, ela dura, então, em torno de 1 hora e 20 minutos, com 10 minutos, né? Esses casos seja necessário. Eu não vou ser draconiana, mas eu espero que todos sigam, né, o previsto, o tempo previsto. Essa também é uma atividade multilingüe. O inglês é a língua principal, mais usada entre palestrantes e respondentes, mas todos os participantes são convidados a falar, cada um na sua língua de preferência, francês, espanhol, português, enfim. Nós apenas pedimos que, caso fale em outra língua, seja projetado na tela o texto em inglês. Com esse formato, nós acreditamos estimular as interações entre os participantes e dar maior visibilidade para pessoas de várias partes do mundo. Eu gostaria de observar também que a nossa intenção, né, que os respondentes apresentem ou discutam algum aspecto do livro, né, algum evento ou algum tema relacionado ao assunto do livro, e não faça uma resenha ou uma análise detalhada, né. Nesta sessão, nós teremos dois livros, né? O primeiro, Women as Citizens During the Republic, pela Universidade de Sevilha. Ele foi editado pela professora Cristina Rosillo Lopez, que infelizmente não pôde participar, e por Silvia Lacorte, que está aqui. A Cristina é uma professora titular na Universidade Pablo de Olavide e tem publicado sobre história das mulheres no mundo antigo, sociedade, questões econômicas, economia e finanças, principalmente questões ligadas ao mercado imobiliário, né, na antiguidade. E a Silvia é uma candidata, né, defendendo a tese na próxima semana, em História Antiga, na mesma Universidade Pablo de Olavide. A respondente é Giulia Vettori, que é professora assistente da Universidade de Trento, com uma pesquisa sobre história social e econômica, né, no mundo romano e a condição da mulher, condição sociojurídica das mulheres em Roma. O segundo livro The Lives and Deaths of Women in Ancient Pompeii. Foi publicado nesse ano pela Universidade de Texas e foi escrito por Brenda Longfellow, que é Roger Hornsby Associate Professor in Classics and Associate Professor in Art and Art History and Design na Universidade de Iowa. Ela trabalha com arte, arquitetura romana, fountains, né? No mundo antigo, estatuária em Grécia, em Roma e Pompeia. E a respondente é Sarah Levin-Richardson, que é professora associada de estudos clássicos na Universidade de Washington, Seattle, e a pesquisa dela é principalmente sobre cultura material, arte, arquitetura, epigrafia, inscrições, né, e história social em Roma. Antes de eu passar a palavra às palestrantes, eu gostaria de agradecer a Sofia Moraes e a Nicolas Casemiro, estudantes de mestrado e graduação em filosofia na Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, onde eu também, né, trabalho. Eu agradeço então a eles pela assistência técnica e nós agradecemos a todos vocês por estarem aqui, né? E lembramos que essa sessão de novembro, né, com ela nós completamos 2 anos dos encontros e a gente espera que em 2026 tenhamos, né, novamente análise de livros tão estimulantes como esses dois. Então agora eu passo a palavra à primeira palestrante. Então, por gentileza, Silvia.
Thank you so much, Maria Cecilia, for your kind presentation. First of all, I would like to express on behalf of Cristina, Rosillo, Lopez, and myself our sincere gratitude to Jacqueline and Maria Cecilia for the opportunity to present our book within the framework of the EuGeStA project cycle of meetings. We deeply appreciate the invitation and the space provided to discuss our findings and the perspectives that have guided this project. At the same time, we are pleased to share this session with Brenda Longfellow, whose fascinating book offers a perspective very much in line with that of EuGeStA Romanae. EuGeStA Romanae, Roman Women as Citizens During the Republic, was published in open access in 2024 as the final outcome of an international conference that Cristina, Rosillo, Lopez and I organized at the Pablo de la Vida University in Seville in October 2022. This conference grew out of frustration from Cristina's part. At the moment, she had a research project on the census during the Roman Republic, and she kept on reading about how Roman women were not citizens, or at most just second-class citizens. She remembered the courses she took in Roman law, and Roman jurists were absolutely clear. Children, and any person for that matter, could only be Roman citizens if both parents were Romans. Puzzled, Cristina started asking colleagues at conferences in an informal way whether they believed Roman women were citizens, and their answers startled her. They ranged from yes to no to I don't know. All this convinced her that the matter was worth of a new analysis by a collective of scholars who specialized on the topic from many different perspectives. This confusion regarding the citizenship of women may have arisen from several reasons. First of all, some scholarship had not integrated the advances on gender history and history of women. Secondly, our contemporary history, which equates voting rights with citizenship, especially through the late 19th and early 20th century. Thus, as Roman women did not vote, ergo, they were not citizens. However, Roman jurists were adamant. Roman citizenship was not linked to suffrage, but to a legal status which allowed certain legal rights, which in many cases both women and men enjoyed in contrast with non-citizens. In the Roman world, citizenship was not a yes-no question, but citizens could have certain privileges or not, depending on their legal status, sui juris or alieni juris. For instance, a sui juris woman could own property, while a man whose father was still alive could not own a single sesterce, although he might be elected magistrate. Or even their physical or mental health. A blind man, for instance, while being a full Roman citizen, could not legally become a magistrate. Thus, there were many nuances to being a citizen, which were not always related to gender. Thirdly, many postulates regarding citizenship of women go back to scholars from the 19th century and early 20th century, a time when women had hardly political or economic life. Thus, for Theodor Mommsen, for example, it was difficult to understand how a Roman woman could have a sizable fortune and manage her own affairs, and occasionally also have a great political influence, when her spouse, for instance, could not legally own anything nor have a say in politics. When reading previous scholarship, taking into account the context in which that research was written may help us understand their perspective. In summary, our hypothesis was clear. Roman women of the Republic were indeed citizens. The volume Cives Romanae brings together 19 studies, offering a variety of perspectives and nuances on the forms through which Roman women exercised their citizenship, with the aim of constructing a historical discourse that places them on an equal footing with men as relevant historical actors. Moving on to the structure, the monography is organized into 3 major sections, each of which explores a different facet of female citizenship. The first one, political agency and spaces, memory and community. In this regard, we had the honor of opening the volume with a chapter by our keynote speaker, Susan Treggiari. Drawing on her extensive expertise in legal texts, she shows that although the expression civis romana is not commonly attested outside juridical sources, the broader term civis was in fact used to refer to both men and women. While women did not possess the legal rights of male citizens, such as voting or holding a magistracy, they were nonetheless embedded within the civic fabric through obligations and roles defined by tradition and social expectation. Chief among these, grounded more in mos maiorum than in formal law, was the marital obligation to bear legitimate children, a role essential for the continuity of the civic body. This perspective is further developed in the case of the role of the Sabine women as legitimators of citizenship, being them both foreigners and first Roman citizens. The multiple ways in which women experienced citizenship can be also seen employing a concept just as multifaceted as that of populus Romanus. Women formed part of the civic body by shaping communal life through exemplary behavior, participation in ritual and social activities, and their presence in informal arenas where political culture was negotiated. Civic identity was also expressed through economic instruments. The dowry, for instance, not only structured a woman's position within the household, but also indicated her integration into the civic community and her social respectability, particularly through the legal protection associated with its restitution in the event of divorce. These dynamics were not limited to the elite. Freed women articulated their citizenship through practices rooted in ritual, religious participation, and communal visibility, which enabled them to adopt the values and behavioral models associated with Roman matronae. Latin women, too, inhabited a form of dual citizenship at local level, grounded less in political participation than in the capacity to operate within the shared legal framework, thereby engaging with the civic order in ways that transcended formal political structures. Taken together, these patterns reveal a rich spectrum of female civic engagement, legal, social, economical, and ritual, demonstrating that Roman women inhabited the civic sphere in complex and meaningful ways that challenge the traditional notion of their passivity within the Roman community. The main thread of the second section is women's political agency. In this sense, its primary objective is to shed light on the concrete manifestation of women's public and political roles. A compelling illustration of this emerged, for example, from the analysis of the Livy story of Virginia and its modern reception. The reactions of the Roman matrons to Virginia's plight and death reveal the extent to which women could intervene publicly and mobilize civic sentiment, reflecting an ancient narrative tradition that acknowledged their capacity for collective action. At the same time, the absence of this and other references to women in Livy's work from Theodor Mommsen Römische Geschichte demonstrates how the spotlight is placed almost entirely on men, fully in keeping with the German historian's 19th century patriarchal context. Roman women exercised political agency across a wide range of spaces and contexts, both formal and informal. High-status women in the Republican period actively participated in public discourse, addressing audiences in non-institutional settings, as well as in traditionally male-dominated arenas, such as courts and the Senate. This engagement reflects not only their direct involvement in political life, but also a high level of education in rhetoric, oratory, law, and politics. Notable examples include Maesia of Sentinum, who successfully defended herself in a criminal trial, or, for example, Hortensia, who addressed the triumvirs in 42 BCE to protest an extraordinary tax on wealthy women, acting to protect female property and showcasing political agency. Legal contexts offer another crucial side of female agency. Women appeared as subjects in trials, including those against matronae, cases of incestum involving, for example, the Vestal Virgins, and other criminal proceedings, where they could assert their rights. Beyond individual participation, women also shaped legislation through collective action, demonstrating an active role in the development and transformation of the legal system. Economic engagement was equally significant. Through a methodological approach that considers not only literary sources, but especially the epigraphic ones, it is possible to observe that women paid taxes and were also considered as taxpayers in the Roman dominions. Both Roman and non-Roman women were recognized as economic actors, subject to taxation and involved in financial life on a par with men in Rome, as well in Italy and in the provinces. Their influence extended further into diplomacy and international relations as well, where they acted as mediators, facilitators of information, and persuasive agents, shaping political networks and interaction beyond the household. This formal and institutionalized involvement was complemented by a vibrant sphere of informal political activity within private residences. Women's management of financial, social, and political networks allowed them to exercise substantial influence, sometimes provoking official censure or legal action, yet simultaneously demonstrating the multiple ways in which female agency filled both public and private sphere of Roman life. The third and final section of the book, entitled Spaces, Memory and Community, examines how female citizenship was formalized, remembered, and experienced in the collective sphere. Despite the limits of oral tradition and the predominance of a masculine memory that emphasized wars and political achievements, women have always played an essential role as keepers of memory, not only of family history, but also of cultural heritage of the wider community. In this sense, the Ordo Matronarum represents a collective body which contributed to build the civic identity of married citizen women, belonging to the community translated into a sense of identity, justified by the indispensable role of women in its perpetuation. This was expressed through motherhood as a vehicle for transmitting citizenship, religious duties, and a code of values such as castitas and fidelitas. This perspective is further developed, for instance, by examining ingenuae or libertae civis participation through religious practices outside Rome. In conclusion, one of the goals of this book is to gain a firmer understanding of the citizenship of Roman women and their role in the community in order to work toward what has been called a mixed history of ancient Rome, that is a historical discourse that places men and women of an equal footing, considering the latter as historical actors as relevant as the former. As Cristina and I wrote in the introduction of the monography, as historians, we have a duty to paint a picture of ancient Rome that is as complete as possible, for which reason half of the population cannot be left out of the narrative. It is both a professional and ethical duty towards our readers and students, towards the past, and towards society as a whole. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Well, as usual, we have the authors speaking first and the respondent later. So now I give the floor to Brenda Longfellow. Thank you, Brenda. Please.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. I'd like to start by saying thank you to Jacqueline for the invitation to participate today and for organizing this session. And thanks also to Maria and Cecília for moderating today. My book, which is titled The Lives and Deaths of Women in Ancient Pompeii, uses the material remains preserved at Pompeii as its primary source of evidence. I examine statues, wall paintings, inscriptions, and architecture to better understand the multifaceted public lives of women in the city. I focus on the historical period when Pompeii was a Roman colony, from 80 BCE to its destruction in 79 CE. I'm particularly interested in how women of varying social ranks contributed to their communities and interacted with one another across a wide range of activities. I was inspired to write this book by the many publications on Pompeii that assume elite, free-born males are the primary actors and audiences in the city. This widespread assumption tends to influence discussions of even those monuments with extant inscriptions that clearly tell us that they were not built by or for an elite male. For instance, this dedicatory inscription for a tomb tells us that Mulvia Prisca used her own money to build the tomb for her son, Nestorius Priscus. But the tomb is often discussed in scholarship as if the family or even her deceased son built it. Here's another example. This huge urban estate consists of a large house, which you can see in yellow on the slide, and its associated properties. The entire insula was owned by Giulia Felix, who offered the bath complex and some of the retail spaces for rent. The rental notice that is translated on the screen was found in 1755 beside one of the entrances to the bath complex. It provides one of the clearest, most direct pieces of evidence for a female head of household in Pompeii. And yet this fact is not universally accepted. Lawrence-Richardson Jr., for instance, wrote in his influential book titled Pompeii, An Architectural History, that this entire estate was, and I'm quoting, a bath and eating club for wealthy men alone. His rationale, that the luxurious nature of the estate and the lewd to our eyes imagery on vessels excavated in the portico and in the household shrine indicate that this was for a male audience. With this declaration, Richardson effectively silenced Giulia Felix. I have two main objectives with this book. The first is to show how the material evidence at Pompeii provides an important opportunity to understand how multiple generations of women in a single Roman city publicly engaged with their communities in ways that went beyond their primary roles as mothers, daughters, and wives. My second objective is to demonstrate how modern assumptions about ancient Roman women, many of which are rooted in what our ancient sources have emphasized about societal expectations for women, and the modern narratives that have built up about Pompeii over the 277 years of excavations at this site, how these have made us overlook what the material remains are telling us about the lived experiences of women. Indeed, the material record at Pompeii preserves the names of almost 800 individual women and provides evidence of the activities of countless more anonymous women. Due to the abundance of material, I was in the extraordinary position of having to choose one focal point for this book among many possibilities. To most directly address the pervading assumption in scholarship that ancient cities are built by and for elite men, I chose to focus on the agency of a select number of freed and freeborn Pompeian women, as seen through the monuments and objects they commissioned or produced. This choice necessarily highlights those women who had the resources to fund tombs, houses, sanctuaries, and workshops. But the abundance of related material in Pompeii also allows me to provide glimpses of the urban networks of anonymous, enslaved, freed, and freeborn women who played integral roles in these projects and were impacted by the choices made by their female patrons, family members, and fellow worshipers. In short, this book focuses on the women who own property, from burial plots to houses, those who ran businesses, held priesthoods, introduced new deities into the Pompeian pantheon, spent money for the public good, and received public honors. This book begins with 3 chapters on tombs. The first chapter provides an overview of female tomb patronage, while the second and third chapters trace the chronological development of monumental tombs at Pompeii through the tombs built by women. I begin the book in the funerary realm because the material evidence for female social and economic agency is more concentrated and more visible in cemeteries than anywhere else in Pompeii. Female names make up about half of the named population in Pompeian tombs and on burial equipment. More surprisingly, women also make up half of the known tomb builders. Out of the almost 200 monumental tombs in the environs of Pompeii, a total of 44 record the names of their tomb patrons. 22 of these 44 dedicatory inscriptions list women as tomb patrons or building supervisors, suggesting that women were responsible for approximately half of the tombs built between 70 BCE and 79 CE. This fact is notable for several reasons. First, it indicates that more women had control over their economic resources than is often acknowledged in scholarship. Second, it suggests women bore more responsibility than is usually assumed for the needs of the family. Third, these tomb patrons were not just freeborn elite women, but also former slaves. This group of female tomb patrons is remarkable for the equal mix of social classes represented, as 12 of the named women are freeborn and 11 are freed women. Perhaps even more strikingly is that the tombs built by freed women provide some of the earliest and latest known architectural examples of monumental tombs in Pompeii, suggesting that the funereal realm provided a constant place for freed women to claim their newly acquired agency to take care of themselves and their extended families. On the ruling class were integral to the formation of the monumental tomb traditions in Pompeii, and it uses the material record to push back on modern narratives of taste hierarchies linked to social status. Not only has scholarship overlooked the larger community of female tomb builders discussed in these chapters, but it has also glossed over the agency of individual women. Let me give you 3 examples of how this plays out in scholarship. In this plan of the Vesuvian Gate necropolis, the tombs built by women are filled in yellow. As mentioned earlier, when the tomb of Movia Prisca is discussed, her agency as a tomb patron is often diminished by scholars who tend to analyze the tomb's painted imagery as it was chosen by the family or even her deceased son. Here's a plan of Herculaneum Gate necropolis, and again, the tombs built by women are filled in yellow. Other female tomb patrons, like the freedmen Nivolia Atticae, often are framed as laughably overstepping their social status with their tombs, and depicted in scholarship as cartoonish boars along the lines of the fictional Trimalchio. In reality, Levin-Richardson built tomb 22S for herself, her husband, and the freedmen and women, and this tomb looks much like the neighboring tombs. Even an elite woman like EuGeSta is discussed as if she didn't understand social norms. EuGeSta's tomb is 11 OS on this plan of the Nucherian Gate necropolis. Scholars question the location of EuGeSta's tomb in this necropolis, which has been typecast as a cemetery of socially ambitious freedmen, and why it wasn't in the Herculaneum Gate necropolis, which scholars have identified as the rightful resting place of elites. They characterize this second-story semicircular wall as an outlier within an architectural tradition where neighboring tombs sometimes echo each other. But when this tomb is set within the chronological development of monumental tombs in Pompeii, I'm able to show that EuGeSta's tomb actually fits very well within Pompeian funerary traditions, which combine traditional funerary equipment with experimental architectural forms. These first 3 chapters demonstrate how the ancient context of such tombs and tomb patrons can be differently understood when traditional scholarly assumptions are identified and set aside. In addition, by contextualizing EuGeSta's tomb within the larger body of material evidence for female tomb patrons in Pompeii, it becomes easier to see how EuGeSta's tomb would have been perceived by the ancient Pompeians themselves. Chapter 4 bridges the funerary realm and the lives of the living with a discussion of the ways in which the town council recognized individual women with civic honors beginning in the Augustan period. The first funerary honors for women date to this period, as do the first honorific portrait statues of women in the city. So too do the first appearances of public priestesses who served the goddess Venus Pompeiana and later Ceres. This chapter considers the societal implications of the decision of the Ordo to grant specific women the legal privilege of constructing a tomb on public land. Other women received cash gifts and other recognition to accompany this plot of land. As we move into the middle of the 1st century CE, the Ordo extended the allocation of tomb plots to exceptional individuals outside of the decurial elite, including, I argue, Levin-Richardson and her husband. The burial plot given for them is 9 ES on this image. This chapter then shifts focus to the 8 honorific statues set up for elite and imperial women within the city walls. These portrait statues account for 24% of the extant honorific portrait statues in the city. The fine spots for 3 of these statues are marked with an asterisk on this plan of the forum and its environs. These statues are set up in honor of an individual woman by the Ordo, family members, or other communal or religious groups. These honorific statues publicly affirm the reciprocal relationship between the individual woman and the broader community. And the best known of these honorific statues is the one erected for EuGeSta. And this chapter ends by contextualizing this portrait statue, which stood in the immense complex EuGeSta built adjacent to the forum. EuGeSta's motivations for it, with scholars frequently characterizing her civic benefaction as intended to promote her son and his political career. This chapter reconsiders this assumption that familial political gain is a primary motivator for EuGeSta, in part by contextualizing the honorific statue given to her by the Guild of Cloth Workers. The epigraphic, architectural, and sculptural remains of EuGeSta's complex permit a consideration of how she identified herself, what she gave to the community, and how the placement and appearance of her honorific statue within this complex underscored and amplified the public identity of this Pompeian woman. Chapter 5 turns to a different facet of the lives of Mammia and EuGeSta, who each sponsored a new cult in Pompeii, built new religious spaces for the community, and served as public priestesses of the Roman colony's patron deity, Venus Pompeiana. Their leadership in religious EuGeStism can be tied to the ideology of Augustus, who made religious piety a cornerstone of his social policies. This chapter examines how Mammia's introduction of the cult dedicated probably to the genius of the colony, and EuGeSta's invention of the cult of Augustan concord and piety enlarged the city's religious practices in ways that protected the city's interests and strengthened its positive relationship with the imperial family. Furthermore, the cults they sponsored were open to women of all social levels. Thus, Mammia's and EuGeSta's sponsorship of new cults directly impacted the experiences of other women in Pompeii, enslaved, freed, and freeborn. By considering the material evidence for the participation of men and women of varying social statuses in Pompeian religious life, this chapter provides a way in to discussing the female networks threaded throughout the city. Chapter 6 turns our attention to the domestic sphere, where we focus on 4 categories of objects that demonstrate how integral women were to the public face of many Pompeian households. These pieces of evidence are the direct statement of home ownership made by Giulia Felix, which was discussed earlier, the inclusion of women in 4 domestic shrines, where her guardian spirit propitiates the gods on behalf of the household, the placement of 6 portrait busts of women in public areas of 6 houses, and the female portraits painted onto the walls of 30 residences across the city. In discussing Pompeian household architecture, the focus in scholarship has primarily been on the presumed male homeowner, while the presence of females in the household often are assumed to be where men are not, and or they go unremarked outside of discussions of loom weights and female toiletry articles. Like the evidence discussed in the previous chapters on sanctuaries and tombs, the domestic evidence suggests that traditional scholarly assumptions about fixed delineations of gender roles can include the activities of Pompeian women that are actually visible in the material record. These objects that I explore in this chapter also demonstrate why scholarly presumptions of male heads of households in Pompeii need to be nuanced and reconsidered. The final chapter provides a conclusion to the book's survey of the public lives of women in Pompeii by considering a facet of their lives that, like religious activities, fuse together activities and relationships in domestic and civic spheres, and that is their commercial endeavors. Miko Floor and others have pointed out that many of Pompeii's workshops and shops were run by families, and this work often occurred in retail spaces and workshops physically attached to the large and small residences alike. Commercial activities also took place in the atrium or peristyle of the house itself, making any strict divide between domestic and public involvement inherently problematic. This chapter builds on this idea to contextualize the engagement of Giulia Felix, Hoconia, in commercial endeavors. All 3 women were wealthy, while Hoconia and Eumachia were members of the decurial elite families, who were individually celebrated by the larger community with honorific statues. By the nature of their gender and social status, traditional scholarship has sidelined Eumachia and Hoconia from consideration of urban business activities, but the material evidence in Pompeii suggests they played integral roles in the urban economy that went far beyond being passive landholders. Among the 16 known members of the elite Hoconii family, only Hoconia's name is stamped on bricks or tiles. This stamped name indicates that she owned rural properties containing clay fields and the consequent tile-making business. And if we treat this evidence in the same fashion as we would a tile stamped with the name of a man, then it suggests she controlled the production of her workshop. By considering how commercial activities of women overlapped and intertwined with their familial and communal engagement, we can see how much information we miss about the overall population of Pompeii when we assume that these activities happening in the city were primarily done by and for men. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Now I'll give the word to, where is she? To Giulia to comment Silvia's presentation. Thank you, Giulia, please.
Thank you, Maria Cecilia, for your kind presentation, and also to Jacqueline for the kind invitation to this event, which is part of a wonderful project on gender scholarship, which deserves a lot of attention. So I'm really, really glad to be here with you today. And of course, I'm really, really happy to respond and to present Cives Romane, the book edited by Cristina Rosillo Lopez and Silvia Lacorte. So Cives Romane has the great merit of broadening our understanding of citizenship beyond just suffrage, a view mainly shaped by events like the American Revolution and the French Revolution, which have influenced our classifications, but also by common historiographical clichés. The volume explores the vital issue of Roman female citizenship, shedding light on the lived experiences of Roman women and moving beyond a purely legalistic perspective. As Susan Treggiari noted in her influential chapter at the beginning of the volume, a civis romana was defined by what a civis romana did. Indeed, there were many actions that a female citizen could undertake that remained within the boundaries of the law, but also in social practice. In fact, despite being bound by significant gender constraints and enacting their citizenship differently from men, Roman women were cives, and their experience as citizens was absolutely multifaceted. They were part of the populace, as Amy Russell clearly demonstrated. They were essential in the transmission of citizenship. They could enjoy property rights and pay taxes. They could influence politics. And finally, they could act as guardians of memory, not only of family memory, but also of the cultural memory of the community, as Anna Mahorgas has shown. These are just a few of the many, many ways in which cives Romane express their belonging to the community, the richness and the complexity of the volume in just a few minutes. Silvia has just done a fantastic job in summarizing the various sections and the chapters of the book. I will highlight just a few key areas of research that are extensively discussed in the volume and where cives Romane serves as a crucial point of reflection, also guiding future investigations. One important aspect to highlight, considering the renewal in classical studies driven by subaltern and post-colonial perspectives, is the space the volume allocates to less privileged aspects of citizenship. In other words, cives Romane does not only focus on elite matrone or their historiographical representations, but helps to build a new discourse which is not built exclusively around upper-class women living in Rome. The chapter by Estela García Fernández is paradigmatic in this regard. It highlights the visibility of Latin women, who were once probably even more numerous than Roman citizens themselves, and comprised women who enjoyed ius connubii and could thus become very important in the transmission of citizenship. Carla Rubiera Cancelas, on her side, addresses the issue of citizenship from a bottom-up perspective by focusing on libertae, which are seldom considered in reflection on Roman female citizenship. However, after manumission, libertae represent a far from negligible group of Roman citizens. Rubiera Cancela seeks to highlight the dynamism that characterizes their lives and emphasizes the importance that limited financial autonomy granted by the peculium could confer on female slaves. This element introduces a second significant research focus emerging from the volume: women's economic and financial agency, an aspect that also clearly features in Brenda Longfellow's volume on Pompeian women. Of course, cives Romane also clearly highlights female political agency. I'm thinking of Lewis Webb's contribution on the Ordo Matronarum, which is inside the volume. I'm thinking of Kit Morrell's chapter on women as promoters of legal change, and also to Harriet van der Blom's chapter on female speech. And of course, there are many, many other contributions in this respect. For example, the one of Pilar Pavón Torrejon's on Aemilia Tertia, Cornelia, and Sempronia. And also, I'm thinking about the figure of Aemilia Lepida analyzed by Frédéric Hurlet. The influence of women in political mechanisms beyond the institutional level is now a well-established element in the scholarly debate, as evidenced by the studies by Francesca Rosillo and by Cristina Rosillo Lopez herself. However, one of the most promising lines of research, which requires further investigation in my opinion, is the ability of these women to integrate into the community and influence politics through their wealth. Regarding women's expenditures for the community's benefit, we have the exceptional work of Emily Emmerich. Still, Cives Romanae, along with other recently published or upcoming volumes on women's wealth, allow me to recall my Bonae Matronae and Bona Matronarum, Donne e Capacità Patrimoniale tra Repubblica e Principato, which is published by Edipulia in 2022, or the forthcoming Women, Wealth and Power in the Roman Republic, edited by Lewis Webb and Catherine Steele for Cambridge University Press in 2026, hopefully. Well, this highlights that women's wealth could contribute to the stability of the Respublica in ways beyond evergetism. Cristina Rosillo Lopez, what she gives is yes, women did pay taxes, and examining their role in the fiscal system is certainly worthwhile, as is recognizing that dowries and their personal wealth were by no means trivial or private matters. Instead, they were deeply connected to the political and power dynamics of the Respublica and the empire. However, these were simply a few suggestions. Apart from its clear scientific value, I would like to emphasize two additional important aspects of the volume: its inclusivity and its impact. Firstly, Cives Romanae promotes the inclusivity of research not only on women, but also by women. A clear indication of this can be seen in the final bibliographical references of each chapter, where the full names of all authors are listed. This helps give visibility to research by female historians, which is not a minor element. The marginalization of women in academia has been an issue in not so recent past, and remains so, making Cristina and Silvia's editorial choices particularly meaningful. In this regard, I would like to emphasize one additional point. In Cives Romanae, attention is also given to those taking their first steps in academia. Even if we want to leave aside the role performed by Silvia, who has brilliantly co-edited the volume and has just completed her PhD, and we look at the authors of the volume's chapters, there is a clear positive inclination towards academic mentoring. Alongside established scholars, both men and women, just to mention a few, I can cite Susan Treggiari, Aglaia McClintock, Annie Russell, Francesca Rohr, Catherine Welch, Estela Garcia Fernandez, Henriette van der Blom, Frédéric Hurlet, and of course, Cristina Rosillo Lopez herself. Among the authors of the volume's contributions, one can find the names of those who, in 2024, were still doctoral students and young researchers. In fact, each of the three sections of the volume includes the work of postdoctoral researchers who have undoubtedly benefited from the fruitful and friendly scholarly dialogue experienced during the conference in Seville and afterwards. Furthermore, the conclusions of the volume were entrusted to a young researcher too, Carmen Alarcón Hernández, who was particularly effective in summarizing the kaleidoscopic dimensions of female Roman citizenship that first emerged at the Seville conference and are now collected in the volume. Furthermore, the publication's significance is confirmed by its impact on the scholarly debate and beyond. Apart from the quality of its content, this is also supported by two practical elements that I would like to highlight. The first is the speed of the editorial process. The editor's swift yet no less careful work ensured that the volume saw the light of the day just a year and a half after the international conference that sparked the discussion of this critical issue of female citizenship. The conference took place in October 2022, and Cives Romanae has been published in June 2024. This is absolutely a great result, with 19 authors, and this offers an up-to-date bibliography, which is an invaluable resource for specialists, as are the indexes that accompany the volume. The second factor is the publisher and the publication format. The volume is the 12th in the excellent Libera Respublica collection, a joint project between the University of Seville and the University of Saragossa, with an outstanding scientific committee. Fortunately, it is available in open access, which always adds value to the dissemination of research results. In this respect, it should be noted that some of the most innovative ideas that emerge in the volume Cives Romane are also taken up in the Quaderno Libera Respublica. This is a further initiative that testifies to the series and its editor's efforts to disseminate the most important findings to a broader audience than just specialists. The 7 published Quadernos Liberas Republicas are all in Spanish in a very reader-friendly format and just over 40 pages long. Some of them are edited by authors who also contributed to the Cives Romane collective volume and revisit the topics covered in Cives Romane in a simple and didactically effective way. As a final point regarding the impact of the volume, I also note that one of the most recent and up-to-date Roman history textbooks for Italian universities, Storia di Roma Antica, edited by Federico Russo and his younger colleagues, cites the volume in the section on women in the late Republic. I hope this will also be the case for other current or forthcoming textbooks in different countries. This would serve as another clear indication of how Cristina and Silvia's work might enrich the education of new generations of ancient history students on this topic, which, unfortunately, remains relatively underrepresented in bachelor's degree courses due to time constraints, with only a few notable exceptions. Ultimately, so some concluding remarks. Ultimating, the volume Cives Romane represents an invaluable contribution to rethinking the role of women in the ancient world. This rethinking also relates to women today. There are still too many stereotypes from the past that cast their shadow over the present. Emphasizing the multifaceted nature of Roman citizenship, which was certainly not limited to political aspects, and the agency that women could exercise, the rich volume edited by Cristina and Silvia undoubtedly deserves credit for helping to dismantle these stereotypes, thereby doing an excellent service to the scientific community and beyond. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Giulia, and thank you. Now, Sarah Levin-Richardson will comment Brenda's book, please.
It's such an honor to be in this room with so many individuals and we're all tackling similar issues in our work. The Lives and Deaths of Women in Ancient Pompeii is a carefully argued monograph that is a must-read for anyone who works on Roman civic life, religion, Pompeii, or gender. Longfellow compellingly refutes many common assumptions about the limited roles of women in ancient Roman society, assumptions that have been repeated so often that they've become a form of received wisdom. While her case study is Pompeii, her methodology and findings are broadly applicable outside of Pompeii. We should all be inspired to reconsider how we approach the past and what gender-based and status-based assumptions we bring to our fields of study. Longfellow's topic, broadly speaking, is the visibility and agency of women in Roman Pompeii. While some Pompeian women are rather well known in scholarship, such as Eumachia, patron of Pompeii's fullers and builder of the largest building in Pompeii's Forum, other women have essentially been hidden in plain sight. These overlooked women served in the highest levels of religion, were wealthy landowners, and promoted the enslaved and freed members of their households through networks of patronage. Even Eumachia receives critical reanalysis. Building from the material evidence of her life, rather than working backwards from assumptions about Roman gender roles, Longfellow shows that we have not fully appreciated Eumachia's roles in Pompeian society. Longfellow achieves her aims through rigorous archaeological, art historical, and epigraphic analysis. I'll start by highlighting her reanalysis of 3 of the better-known women from Pompeii: Eumachia, the freedwoman Naiwalea Tuke, and the property owner Julia Felix. Eumachia's dedication of a massive building on the Forum is often assumed to be a way to promote the political career of her son, whose name is also mentioned in her dedicatory inscription. What Longfellow points out is that the dedicatory language remains in the singular, dedicavit, despite the mention of her son. It is Eumachia's euergetism that is demonstrated, not that of her and her son jointly. Longfellow analyzes additional material evidence to further support that Eumachia's agency need not go hand in hand with her role in her family. The honorific statue of her erected by the Fullers makes no mention of husband nor son, nor is it part of a statuary group including any male family members. She's honored as patron of their guild in her own right. Likewise, her monumental tomb makes no mention of male family members, other than identifying her as the daughter of Lucius. Longfellow comments, quote, "For strangers approaching Pompeii, this tomb spoke to the social importance of Eumachia, not of her son, not of her husband, and not of her larger family, except as beneficiaries of her benevolence." End quote. The freedwoman Naiwalea Tuke is also fairly well known. The received wisdom is that Naiwalea Tuke was an upwardly mobile freedwoman who used the financial resources of her husband, a freedman, to build a large, ornately decorated altar tomb outside the Herculaneum Gate. This was, in fact, one of two funerary monuments dedicated to the pair. The other was dedicated by the husband outside the New Caria Gate. The size and decoration of the Herculaneum Gate tomb is often framed as representative of the over-the-top efforts by freedmen and freedwomen to mimic the practices of elites. What Longfellow shows is that Naiwalea Tuke's tomb, if it were devoid of its inscription, would be indistinguishable from the types of tombs built by free men and free women. It is our assumptions about class, influenced by Roman stereotypes like Trimalchio, no doubt. It is our assumptions that frame and describe Naiwalea Tuke's tomb as different. Longfellow also points out a seemingly small detail with massive repercussions. A ship features prominently on the tomb, and it is usually assumed that this is a reference to her late husband's economic pursuits and the source of his wealth. However, Longfellow points out that this ship is steered by a female figure, the goddess Tuke, in fact, and that is perhaps meant to evoke the name of the builder of the monument, namely Naiwalea Tuke. Longfellow concludes that Naiwalea Tuke was the likely shipowner, and the wealth was hers, not her husband's. Another woman often mentioned in discussions of Pompeii is Giulia Felix, whose name is known from a rental notice painted on the property she owned. The rental notice offers 5-year leases for the bath complex, shops with living quarters above, and second-floor apartments. Despite this specificity, scholars regularly assume that the luxurious garden and residence behind the bath complex was part of the rental properties, and they populate it with well-off, usually male bathgoers, rather than Giulia Felix and her household staff and guests. In a similar rental notice of a male property owner, however, scholars never assume that his massive atrium-style house was part of the rental units. Reorienting Giulia Felix's house and garden space with her as the owner and resident means that we now must reorient how we think about the role of women in Pompeian houses and in networks of patronage. To give just one example that shattered my mental image of how spaces were peopled, Longfellow suggests that the pergola in the garden, quote, provided shade for those strolling around the garden, either with Giulia Felix or waiting for an audience. Like other large houses, she continues, this property would have been filled with throngs of clients, slaves, libertini, business associates, messengers, and others, end quote. And she provocatively asks, quote, how many other female heads of households were strolling around their gardens with their guests, end quote. By unraveling previous assumptions and applying the same criteria to this property as to male-owned properties, Longfellow has revealed a powerful female landowner in her own luxurious property. These women are best known, but Longfellow's analysis shows that they are far from unique. So let me preview for you some of her findings. Women appear in 30% of the portrait statues that were set up in Pompeian houses, providing another piece of evidence for the role of women as homeowners. Women also appear in Pompeii's public honorific statuary, constituting 24% of extant examples. One of these women, who we've already heard about from Brenda, is a woman named Holconia, whose family was one of the most elite at Pompeii. One of her male relatives, Marcus Halconius Rufus, was military tribune by popular demand, duumvir with judicial power 5 times, quinquennial twice, priest of Augustus Caesar, and patron of the colony. And yet it was Holconia, not any of her prestigious office-holding male relatives, who owned the lucrative clay fields that financed her family's wealth. Longfellow notes that 50% of the cult temples added in the Augustan period were built by women. Women, both freeborn and freed, also commissioned half of Pompeii's tombs. Moreover, of the funerary plots awarded by the town council, 25% of them are for women, and these women are honored in their own right. Longfellow argues, quote, they, like the male recipients, received the tomb plots due to their own actions and merits, end quote. And in fact, the highest preserved funerary honor goes to a woman, Aurelia Tertulla, whose entire funeral was provided at public expense. Longfellow doesn't stop at establishing these facts. She vividly unspools what this agency involves. When women built tombs, for example, Longfellow details, quote, they purchased land, oversaw construction, financed funerary equipment, composed inscriptions, and selected sculpture and painted imagery, end quote. These tombs were embedded within Pompeii's landscape, quote, providing ready surfaces for casual graffiti and more formal advertisements of games and other announcements, as well as places to rest a moment in the shade, relieve bowels, or surreptitiously bury a curse tablet, end quote. If there are takeaway messages for all of us here today, it is to meet the challenges laid down in Longfellow's book, namely, to check our assumptions, to revisit the case studies we think we know best, and to look for where women might be hidden in plain sight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Now you can open the discussion. And I'd like to ask if Silvia would like to comment and of observation by Giulia, and later if Brenda would like to comment and observation comments by Sarah. And then after this, we open to the whole, all people here. Silvia?
Yes, thank you, Maria Cecilia. I would like to thank Giulia for her kind speech for the book, and also I would like to spend some words about Giulia's work in the book. Giulia Vettori's chapter actually closed the first section of the book, the one about citizenship, and it was a brilliant chapter about dowry, as the same title said, dowries and female citizenship. Giulia Vettori's chapter was a kind of examination of the concept of dowry as a tool for investigating female citizenship during the Middle Republic and the late Roman Republic. It was a very interesting chapter divided into 2 parts. In the first part, she analyzed the causes behind the partial or complete loss of a dowry, such as adultery or drinking wine or sexual misconduct, for instance, as well as the mechanisms employed to protect total assets by women. So it's a brilliant study with specific cases such as the one of Fania and the one of Licinia, the Gaius Gracchus wife who lost during 121 BC BCE. And the case study Giulia did in her chapter is interesting because revealed not only that Roman women could take legal action to claim their belongings, such as, for example, in the case of Licinia, but also the importance of total assets as an essential means of expressing their belonging to the civic community. And also, as I was saying at the beginning of my speech, as a form of respectability, women respectability as citizens. Furthermore, Giulia also analyzed in her chapter the impact that dowries have in general on families, particularly in relation to the financial and social position of husbands. And I don't know if Giulia wants to add something else to her own work in relation to her own work. In any case, thank you so much, Giulia.
No, actually, I think that you even said too much about my chapter, so I don't really want to add anything. Just a quick remark about the value of the volume, which is really, with 19 contributions of different scholars with very different perspectives, is a really, really a wonderful starting point to go ahead with the study of Roman women and their relationship to the civitas and their belonging to the civic community. So I think that more than enough. Thank you, Silvia.
Thank you. Brenda?
Thank you. Sarah, thank you so much for that response to my book. It made me feel heard, and I really appreciate that. I was impressed that you pulled together all the statistics or the percentages of how many of the household statues were of women and how many of the honorific statues. And just to add one more, the only one that's in my head, and that is the funerary statues of women account for 40% of the funerary statues we have in Pompeii. And so it's interesting to think of how it's in the necropolis where we see the most clear presence of women as a whole, in terms of 50% of the tombs being commissioned by them. But also that's where we see the greatest presence of their visages, right? And then and also our images of women start in the tombs, and then beginning in the Augustan period, we have them in the honorific statues, and then we have 24%, right? And then they go into the houses. It seems that seems to be the kind of the, I guess, trickle down of the influence of those funerary spaces on the rest of the community, which I find an interesting thing to think about. I also thought it was interesting that we basically chose more or less the same examples to pull out from the book, and I really appreciate that you brought in the comparandum for Giulia Felix's estate of the estate of Elias Nigidius Maius, that's also for rent, and how differently, I mean, I think that just illustrates how differently once a woman's name is attached to something in Pompeii, it is automatically treated. And so I really appreciate your big takeaway that we check our assumptions. And I have to say that your book on the brothel in Pompeii really got me thinking about, like, in things, ideas had been kind of circulating in my head, right? But really got me thinking about checking those assumptions and really going to what's on the ground, what the material record can tell us without the noise of our secondary sources. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. And actually, I do have a question for you, thinking about the purpose-built brothel in Pompeii. As you're reading my book, did you see ways that it tied into this story?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Um, I I think it tied in the sense that we're both interested in recovering the voices of individuals who literally are there on the walls in the material evidence that generally have been overlooked. And when we take that material evidence seriously, a whole world opens up. And I think, my world was very contained in terms of the brothel, and yours is Pompeii. And as you were talking about the prevalence of female statuary in the necropolis, I was thinking about how, and I kind of I mentioned your description of people coming in and seeing Eumachia's tomb. The first impression that visitors get is one that's populated by women. And as you were describing this, it just struck me that this is every visitor to Pompeii, everyone coming back home is going to be surrounded by this imagery of women. And if it's okay to praise you for another thing that ties into what Giulia was saying about women as citizens during the Republic, the idea of citational practices is, I think, something that all of us think about. And Brenda, one of the things that I really appreciated is that you named people in your text, right? With their full names, and you give them credit for their arguments. And I think it's very, very easy in academia to say something, to have a footnote, and then that person's name, is on page 360, and no one knows who that is. And I think you do a really good job of giving credit to the scholars who are also working on these issues. So hooray for citational practices.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from the others? No. May I start with one question to Silvia? And I think also perhaps Brenda could give some answer to it. Silvia, two questions actually. The first was the decision to do a book, a bilingual book, because it has paper in Spanish and in English. This decision for us from, for instance, South America, Brazil, the use of the language that is not our language is always a bit complicated. So sometimes this decision we do it for other reasons too. But I would like to ask you what was the reason of this in Europe. And the other question is about the chapter that interests me. Firstly, was about the female orator in the Republic. No? And you have a few cases by the author Van der Bloem. No? And I would like to ask, and perhaps Brenda could also give some information about this, another kind of rhetoric, even a rhetoric of silence, but in some sense also the rhetoric of gesture using sculpture or paintings. If you could talk something about this, a research that would consider also this what you call visual rhetoric as a kind of voice of women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria Cecilia. I will start answering the first question. The decision to let the authors free to write their chapter in their own language, even if there are authors who wrote chapters in a second language, basically derived from two factors. The first one was that also in the conference, everyone was free to deliver her or his speech in her own or his own language. And the second factor is that Libera Respublica, which is the collection series in which Chives Romana was published, usually published in any language. So they used to publish in Spanish, English, Italian, French. So basically we decided that since it wasn't a problem for the publisher, it was maybe a good idea to make a book written in different languages. Actually, we also have a chapter, if I remember well, or maybe two, written in French. So yeah, it's a mixed volume. And regarding your second question, yes, the chapter about female oratory was the chapter written by Henriette van der Bloem. She mentioned in her chapter some cases. Maybe the most famous one is the one of Hortensia, the daughter of the famous orator Hortensius Sortalus, and which is a brilliant chapter actually, as well as all the chapters we have in the book. But about the rhetoric of silence, there is an example which comes to my mind right now, which is the one of Sempronia. It's an example which actually Henriette van der Bloem deals with in her chapter as well as Pilar Pavon. In the case of Sempronia, the youngest sister of Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, and of course the daughter of Cornelia, it's very emblematic from this point of view because she's called around 102, 101 BCE. She's called on the rostra to express her opinion about the figure of Lucius Sequitius, which pretend himself to be the son of Tiberius Gracchus. So it's Valerius Maximus, if I remember well, our main source about the event during which it seems that it was properly precisely the silence of Sempronia deciding to not answer to the question if Equitius was or not her nephew, which was itself an answer meaning not. He is not a relative of mine. So this can, for example, be, for instance, be an emblematic example of the rhetoric of silence. If I understood correctly your question.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking also in gestures in some other possibility visual.
Well, actually, in the same
anyway.
episode. Yeah, in the same episode, there is also the, I don't remember right now if it's Valerius Maximus as well telling this, but there was also this gesture of the kiss. In theory, Sempronia had to kiss Equitius if he was really, for real, her relative. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I could say just a little bit about gesture with sculptures, and the idea of the Matrona Docta. We have one of our oldest funerary statues in Pompeii. Has a woman who's writing. She's seated, and she's holding a writing implement, and she's paired with a man who's doing the same thing, and it's about 50 BCE is the date of it, and it's our earliest example in Pompeii of a woman, shown, writing. And then about 100 years later, you start to see this image appear on the walls with the painted images of women where they're holding, the stylus to their chin or something. And it's interesting to think that while we have the elites like Sempronia, who are we understand, of course, they're well educated and they learn these skills. We seem to have in Pompeii this regional community, women who are also through the gestures in their images being held up for their literacy in interesting ways. And we never assume that they're poets, right? We assume, if we're going to assume anything, that it's something to do with what they do for the household. right? But it would be interesting to think if maybe there was more to it, and then another layer to some of those images, especially this early one where she's just, it's a second story of the tomb, and she and her husband are just both pictured as these educated people. And I should say, these are unusual. Most of the statues in Pompeii, women aren't doing gestures. They might be holding something, or they'd be holding like a patera or a torch or something, but they're not. That's it. Otherwise, their arms are enveloped in their clothing.
Thank you. I don't see. Let me see. I don't know if there is more questions, or Jacqueline, would you like to make any comment?
Yes, just only a very general comment on the two books. I'm struck by the fact that female researchers change our view on antiquity. Male famous researcher finally provided incomplete vision of antiquity. There are this is a part of, like Giulia seems to me, as said, a part of a colonial perspective. This means they provide a view, an incomplete view on antiquity because they are not interested in women, and so it's only thank you for the women who are working now to correct this image by making it more rich, more complete. So it's only very general comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Any comments? Any observation? Well, if not, we are also in our time. So I would like to thank you, all of you, again, very much for being here, sharing with us your research, your books. I thank you also, Jacqueline, for EuGeStA, for putting this, also, and also our assistants, Sophia and Nicholas.
Thank you for your assistance, for the organization. It is wonderful. Thank you very much, Cecilia. No.
Last session in the year. We hope in our third year in 2026 to have again more books, more people, and it's nice that everything is recorded, so you can return to the talks, to the sessions. Everything is on YouTube channel of EuGeStA. So I can only say thanks again, and I hope you also have in these festive seasons that is coming, that you have a nice end of year and a wonderful 2026 with many books, many women's men research. Jacqueline?
We remain together in order to speak about the... You have time to speak now? Okay, we remain together now.
Okay.
You and me, in order to organize the next session.
Okay. Well, so thank you again, and see you next year, I hope. Bye. Congratulations to all of you.
Thank you for Sarah to have been here, because it was very complicated. I'm very grateful for that.